With the Third Age finally reaching its end, and the gods dethroned, Guthix entrusted all mortal kind to its own devices, bringing the beginning of the Fourth Age, the Age of Mortals.
Before I settled to my rest, I walked among my creatures and sought out each of those who were my guardians. When I found each, I asked but one question, for I know their service would be for lifetimes to come, eons of time, and I should recognize their service to this world and myself. So I asked, what gift can I leave you? I came to Juna last. The others had asked for treasures, favors, powers, or artifacts that they wanted or needed for what they thought they might face. I knew that Juna would not be one of those. I was not wrong in this assessment. She lived up to everything I hoped of her. For a moment, she caught my eye before lowering her head. Her eyes welled up with tears while she pondered the answer we both knew was deep within her heart. At last, she whispered it, as much hissed or spoken. "Stay with us." I reached out to her, placed my hand upon the top of her head, and she looked up at me as I smiled at her. For in that moment, I knew my gift to her, and it was the greatest of gifts. This world is yours now, Juna, yours forever. For in my own eyes, tears had formed too, and one rolled down my cheek, and I lifted my hand at last, as the tear fell from my jaw and landed on the floor below Juna. But I could not stay, nor mourn, for the time has come for me to leave. I am so proud of you, Juna. You are like a daughter to me. I hope you know that.
With the Third Age finally reaching its end, and the gods dethroned, Guthix entrusted all mortal kind to its own devices, bringing the dawn of the Fourth Age, the Age of Mortals. Aftermath. Power struggles begin. With the gods of yesteryear expelled, and Guthix returning to his slumber to once again be forgotten, Gielinor and mortals alike could finally begin to mend the damage of the God Wars. However, peace did not become them, as the deep wounds of the wars left a power vacuum that spread across the plain, ready to be exploited by whichever races were bold enough to fill it. Humans picking up the pieces. One of the most ravaged races in the God Wars, conscripted by nearly all sides to fight, most human settlements had been completely destroyed by the start of the Fourth Age. Magically weak, it would not be until the discovery of rune essence that human domination of the plane would begin in earnest. Dwarves, underground ingenuity. During the God Wars, the dwarves had fled underground to escape what they foresaw as imminent destruction through the meddling of the gods. The city of Keldagrim was eventually built and settled deep within Trollweis Mountain. Their subterranean prosperity would be cut short. Previously, they were able to use magic, but Zamorak corrupted their latent magic, causing them to turn into mindless, feverish fanatics known as Chaos Dwarves. The Imkando were protected from the transformation by Saradomin's blessing, but the dwarves of Keldagrim would be forced to seal their magic away, throwing the city into chaos and disarray. They were powerless to quell the fear and uprising. Thus a king was appointed and given unlimited power. The first king appointed was Gosdoran, and the last was King Alvis. In the Fourth Age, he created the Consortium, a collection of mining companies, which were supposed to help him rule. After his death, however, it began to rule instead of a king, ruling for approximately 500 years without interference. After thousands of years underground, at the tail end of the age, dwarves finally began to resurface and interact with life above ground, having been unaware of the end of the God Wars. They quickly established relations with both gnomes and humans alike, though few have made permanent above-ground residences. Gnomes, saplings no more. Having delved into the depths of the earth similar to the dwarves, gnomes emerged to find their previous settlements destroyed, with no trace to be found. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries of the Fourth Age, gnomes would be forced to hide from barbaric human tribes in order to avoid being hunted to extinction by the physically superior foe. Shortly after this period, the Grand Tree would be planted, allowing gnome civilization and technology to once again thrive and grow. Elves beyond the forest. For the first time in living memory, the elves were without their goddess's guidance. Having shattered herself at the end of the Third Age, they were spared the fate of a slow death without her, but now had to find their own way on this strange plane, which was still very alien to them outside of the forests. After a brief period of unrest, the elven clans were unified under monarchy by King Baxtorian and Queen Glariel. Firstly, using the remains of Seren, he rebuilt Prifddinas into a grand crystal city. Baxtorian later set his sights eastward, after the Gwir clan discovered how to use Seren's crystals, allowing them to travel further than the confines of the Tiranwyn forest.
Our civilization fell into chaos. Understand that we were utterly devoted to Seren. Our entire culture revolved around her words of wisdom. Without her guidance, there was panic. The streets were filled with terrified people, unsure of what to do. My beloved Glariel, always the voice of reason, encouraged me to take control of the situation. The Khazard warriors helped to police the city, establishing order, and Glariel and I spoke to the people. It was not a swift thing, of course, but between us, we brought order to chaos.
Goblins, 11 tribes and 1 smith. Among Bandos' chosen warring races, the goblins did not fare as well as other races on the plain. While those upon the surface were forced out of the Feldip Hills by the bigger, stronger and stupider ogres, those left below the surface in Bandos' prized warforge quickly devolved into tribalism and wars of their own. Of the goblins left, 11 tribes remained in the forge, along with 1 dwarf. The tribes quickly set up barriers and traded with Thalmund the dwarf, an Imkando kidnapped by Bandos and forced to smith weapons for his and others' armies. Other Bandosian races. While most of the remaining Bandosians chose to remain within the Feldip Hills to await the return of their god, the Cyclopes abandoned the religion, seeing him as tyrannical, migrating to Wadshanko in the east. The Trolls, already able to operate independently from the rest of Bandos' forces, remained in Gilinor's mountainous northern regions and created their own society. eventually foregoing worship of Bandos entirely. Saradomin, return to Hallow. After Guthix expelled all other gods from the plane, Saradomin took what remained of his Icene back to Hallow, where they would be enveloped in a civil war that had erupted during his absence.
The shadow drew closer, and the once bright sun touched the horizon. I went to the grave of Hazelemere and sat, ready for the cold death. It was then that he came, like a second sun. He shone on the horizon and flew toward me unerringly. At his side, almost invisible in Saradomin's brightness, I could see others. Among them was the surviving warrior. My hope was reignited. Saradomin had returned, and he had not forgotten me.
Armadyl, alone in the cosmos. Armadyl roamed the universe in a solitary pilgrimage to atone for the responsibility of the deaths of millions of Aviancy. Eventually he returned to Abinar, his home, and found that his people had repopulated.
We all migrated to Gielinor for an easier life, but Zamorak destroyed my people with a single act. I believed all of my Aviancy were murdered. I wandered across the cosmos for many years, aimless and in mourning. Hope came back to me slowly, and I eventually returned to Abinar. Now I am as the Phoenix, reborn with new purpose.
Bandos War Games. Bandos began a massive wargame across Ubiusk with his remaining followers, which eventually destroyed the planet and all life on it. V, hero to all. V explored the universe, often meeting other gods, sometimes teaming up with other hero gods to destroy stronger foes together.
I've seen worlds where gods have been victorious. Most of them were adequate, if a little stifled, but so many of the so-called good gods terribly oppress the mortals that worship them. And that's not even counting the evil gods and the worlds they ruin. The desolation of Tuska, the battlefields of Bandos, the fire wastes of the Queen of Ashes, the corpse oceans of Zaltak. Every time I see one of these broken worlds, I remember why it was agreed with Guthix. Gods and their wars are something to be rejected.
The last Zarosian strongholds. The Zarosians were scattered to the wind, with many surviving Imperials imprisoned, while Hisital was in hiding, disguising himself as a human under the alias Ali the Wise. In the frozen wastes of the north, known as the Last Enclave, Gorok was the only remaining Zarosian stronghold of note, filled with those who had fled Sentistan at the command of Priest King Dagroda. Forge War. With the goblins of the Warforge trapped beneath the earth by Bandos, the remaining goblin tribes fought amongst themselves, competing for resources. Thalmund, the Imkando smith enslaved by Bandos, developed a kinship with the goblins over his time enslaved, and swore to get them out, having been enraged by Bandos's betrayal of his armies.
You see, I've been secretly stockpiling peat in small quantities over the years, grinding it to a powder. Tricked them by getting them to allow me to build the distillery, slowly gather certain components and other materials. I've got enough down here to create some potent explosions, but I need more peat to make enough black powder-like substance to get us out. If this is what it's come to, then this also feels like destiny to me, and if it's the last thing I do, it'll be to blow this place wide open and lead these poor goblins, my surrogate family, back out to the surface. If by some miracle I survive, I'm coming home, Chailey.
the Feldip Hills Civil War. With the successful escape of the goblin tribes, they emerged into the Feldip Hills region and began co-mingling with the other goblins and ogres who were already there. However, the Warforged tribes and regular goblins alike were soon set upon by the most powerful ogres, starting a civil war amongst the Bandosians that would last for quite some time. Eventually, the goblins would find themselves evicted from the Feldip Hills and would make their way north towards Greater Kandarin, leading them into greater conflict with the gnomes. The Plain of Mud and Hopespear. Although at this time the elves, gnomes and humans were living in peace, to the south the war between the ogres and their goblin neighbours degenerated into an attempted genocide of all goblin races by the ogres. This started a mass exodus of the goblin races, and they started to emigrate north along the coast, moving through the lands not yet settled by the elves. Not able to defeat the much larger ogres, the walled settlements of the humans, and unable to compete with the crystal weaponry of the elves, the goblins were forced to fight amongst one another, much like their time in the Warforge. This all culminated in several goblin armies converging in the Hemenster region during a long rainstorm, creating the Plain of Mud. Little did the goblins know, they were being observed. Goblins waded through a quagmire, the tribal colours on their armour indistinguishable beneath layers of mud. No tribe had yet emerged as victor. The goblins had withdrawn to their camps after a day of fighting. Bandos, invisible to the realm and blocked by the edicts, desperately searched for some way to affect events. He saw a goblin runt, frozen in place, looking straight at him. He wondered how the goblin could see him through Guthix's barrier.
Goblin, I am your god! Acknowledge me!
The goblin fell to his knees.
Listen to me, goblin! I will make you my prophet! You are to tell your leaders to stop fighting and give them this message.
Me see throne of big high war god. He shine with light so bright me cannot see him, but me can hear his voice. He say, stop the fighting. He say, fighting good, but not if all my followers die. You must not fight one another so much you all die. Then he say, today I cannot lead you, but someday I send chosen commander to lead you. And I see chosen commander in dream. He wear shining armor and stand at front of army of goblins. Behind chosen commander, army of goblins stretch to horizon. Many goblins, too many to count, and banners of every tribe. Banners of all tribes, even Togesh tribe. Other races, they run away from mighty goblin army. Chosen commander make goblins build siege machines. They break down walls of cities. Then goblins march in and kill everyone. And when all dead, big high war god himself appear and sit on great throne of bronze and rule over all, with chosen commander beside him.
Gnomes Spring. The first of the races to re-emerge from hiding after the God Wars were the Gnomes, who had spent centuries hiding underground to escape the carnage and destruction wrought above them. In an event known as the Great Migration, King Helthorg led his people out from the underground and from the caves in which they lived to rediscover the ancestral lands in which the gnomes had once flourished. the Tree Gnome stronghold. Not all stayed within the confines of the hold. Some of them headed southward, setting up the Tree Gnome village. They celebrated the rediscovery of old lands by planting the Grand Tree, bringing the migration to a close. Peace was not to last, however. As time pressed onwards, the gnomes found their land being invaded by goblins, who had been pushed out of the Feldip Hills by the ogres, their former allies during the God Wars under Bandos. Faced with a mounting threat and at clear physical disadvantages from the overwhelming number and brute strength of goblins, King Helthorg conspired with Glofrey the Untrusted in an effort to turn the tide.
Let us travel back in time to the time you humans call the Fourth Age. King Helthorg had become king. The elves mysteriously decided to travel west, leaving most of Kandarian open for conquest. The humans weren't here yet, only King Helthorg and the gnomes to the north and a collection of goblin tribes to the south. Both armies moved to claim the lands and were of course destined to meet in battle. And so it came to pass the goblin and gnome armies met at the Battle of Atari Sundry. Both sides faced each other on the battlefield. A bloody battle was in prospect. Our gnomes were brave, but were no match for the massive brute goblin stupidity. But Glofrey and King Helthorg had devised a plan. If you don't lead an invincible army, pretend you do. And so Glofrey created an army of illusory giant tortoises, knowing that goblins would be scared of anything bigger than they were. Sadly, the golden times were not destined to last for long.
With this illusory victory, the goblins were forced even further into Kandarian, eventually settling at the Plain of Mud. While the Golden Era had seemingly begun, Glofrey had already set out to conspire against the fledgling empire, and would go on to be banished from the stronghold and all related settlements for his actions. But he would be watching from a distance. Elven Expansion, the Breakout. With their backs to the sea, there was only one way for the elves to expand: east. The elves built the Iriandul Pass, through which they explored the east. Seeing the vacuum in power, the elves elected to move quickly. Only the Khazard clan was sent to settle the newly acquired land, as the elves saw the ogres and goblins to the south as too unstable.
Knowing how volatile the East lands can be, the Assembly of Elders concluded that the safest way to proceed was to draw up non-aggression pacts with the gnomes to the north, the humans to the east, and the ogres to the south. The gnomes, having taken great losses at the end of the God Wars, were more than happy to find a race who did not wish them harm, and signed up to the treaty immediately. The humans, being of many different tribes, were a little harder to get any agreement from. After much time and organization, however, the tribes concluded that a non-aggression pact with the elves was in all their best interests. Lastly, the elves approached the ogres and their kin to the south. Unfortunately, without Bandos' guidance, which had held these races together for millennia, the nation had fallen into a bloody civil war, making any form of a treaty with each side useless. The elven people decided that 2 out of 3 treaties agreed upon was good enough to start the colonization of the new lands, and so the Eastern Province was born.
Once the new realm was secure, the remaining clans expanded into the east. Within a few decades of the breakout, the elves had created many driving settlements and a vast network of roads. According to King Baxtorian, at its peak, the Elven Empire spread across Kandarian and had outposts as far as Misthalin. Human heroes. Whilst humans as a race had never disappeared from the world, nor gone into hiding during or after the God Wars, they were in dire straits after the evictions of the gods they worshipped. Bandosian tribes raged across the world, killing all they came across. The Dragonkin attacked cities. The city of Saranthium was destroyed. legendary heroes would arise during this time, such as Robert the Strong, who, along with his feline companion, Odysseus, drove the Dragonkin back and forced them into hiding once again. Arav defended the city of Avaroka from an attack by the Margaret Zemoragor. Even the peaceful Druids, the first to settle Tavali in Asgarnia, constructed stone circles in honour and defence of their now minor deity, Guthix. Avaroka, Kingdom Renewed. Varrock was built upon the ruins of Ceranthium and Centistan around the middle of the Fourth Age by a group of nomadic humans seeking to settle down. It was here in this small settlement that the hero Arav was raised by the tribe's elders. Through conquest, he scared off the nearby goblin tribes, and with the help of a magical shield crafted by the Imcandle dwarves, he repelled an invasion by the Margaret Zemoragor and his army of the undead. After this, Avaroka began to expand, establishing towns and settlements further abroad, such as the Duchy of Lumbridge, eventually becoming the Kingdom of Misthalin. The founding of kingdoms. Followed by the founding of Misthalin as the first of what would become the Great Central Kingdoms, Asgarnia was founded after. The settlements of Falador, Remington, Camzodal, and Tavali did exist prior to the founding of Asgarnia as a nation. Around the same time, the dwarves began to resurface from their previously founded underground kingdom of Keldagrim and started to interact with and discover other races for the first time since their exodus underground during the God Wars. As human settlements and kingdoms begin to align and strengthen, other races previously inhabiting the lands humans desired began to rush into conflict. Had it not been for the direct intervention of Bandos through the first of his divine prophets, Hopespear, the goblins would surely have gone extinct. From this, the Goblin Cave Temple was built, where the 11 goblin tribes would come to work together, even through their factionalized existence. Their distrust of other species only grew, having twice been betrayed and attacked in recent memory, once by allies. To the far east, House Drakan's terrifying reign only continued as fledgling settlements and kingdoms began to spring up in droves to the west. Given his long reign and boastful demeanour, Lord Loaniel Drakan felt secure enough to attack Misthalin and sent his dark armies forth to take what he saw as a rightful extension of his lands. Fearful of the Lord of Vampirium's rapid advance, the call went out for holy warriors to answer and protect the lands upon which they lived from the terrible scourge. 7 priestly warriors. Roughly around the year 1200, Lord Drakan had conquered nearly all of Mauritania and sought to invade the fertile lands to the west. His first step towards this goal would be Misthalin and its capital Avaroka, just beyond the River Salve. During this ensuing war, at Silveria upon the temple Pater Domus, the temple knights led by the 7 priestly warriors
Ivandis Seergaze,
Iriandul Ghastly,
Thorl Dungan, Derrigal Templeton,
Adersail the Pious,
Friar Twiblick,
Essiandar Gar.
using a blood ritual fused with their holy beliefs given to them by the temple knights, and created a ward that would stop all unholy creatures of Mauritania from crossing the River Salve. However, this came at a great cost. All but one of the 7 perished that night, with the lone survivor being Ivandis Seergaze. With his defeat, Drakan retreated his forces back to his capital city of Darkmere. The vampire forces were so decimated that centuries later, human settlers began settling in northern and western Mauritania, believing it to be safe and outside of Drakan's wrathful gaze. Moia and Bilrach. Moia is a human Margarat hybrid created by the Margarat Lucian. While containing the power of a Margarat, Lucian views her as a failed experiment and treats her as a slave, not as a daughter. Just after the 17th ritual of rejuvenation, Lucian and Zamoragul ordered Moia to track down the Margarat Bilrach, as they believed he tried to remove the ritual marker before the last ritual. Moia would not find Bilrach before the end of this age. Bilrach, meanwhile, had gathered a large following of humans that he had settled into the dragonkin fortress of Demonheim. There he would tunnel down deeper and deeper, seeking a secret rift in reality deep below.
This is it. The area below is weaker than the bedrock I have been forging through, and my magic carves through it like saw through flesh. This must be fate's reward for seeking the interplanar portal below, the portal that separates me from my master's realm of banishment. To think he could have been banished and contained. Vile trickery. I, Bilrach, will find this rift where the barrier between realms thins. I, Bilrach, will reopen it and release my master upon this world once more. I, Bilrach, will release Zamorak.
While Bilrach tunneled deeper, he and his people discovered portals to various different worlds. Through these portals, he allied with and bound many different races to his cause, such as the Stalkers, Behemoths, and Infernal Demons. However, there were those that opposed him, such as the Gorajo. With their introduction to Gielinor, many of these races have since spread across the world. The last king of Keldagrim. With the domain of the dwarves spreading underground, King Alvis created the Mining Consortium, a collection of the 8 most powerful dwarven mining companies that would help to rule. King Alvis mistakenly gave the consortium more and more authority, and by the time of his death, the monarchy had lost all of its power. Despite the rumours that the king had a son, the consortium insisted that the prince and the queen had both died in childbirth, and refused to name an heir. Thus, the era of kings came to an end. While this did lead to a short era of chaos and uncertainty, the dwarves quickly set to work increasing their technological capabilities, the likes of which no other race on Gielinor could rival. The blast furnace, steam-powered boats, trains, and advanced power generation using geothermal heat are all developed in this time period. Resettlement and fall of Mauritania. With enough time having passed since the priestly warriors' sacrifice to protect the Western world, and memory fading, settlers began to head out east, into the cursed lands of Mauritania, heedless of warnings given out by the temple at Domus. Settling down, Port Phasmatis and the lordship of the north coast were built, and for a time were prosperous. However, they would quickly come under the gaze of Drakan, who would set his dark creatures upon them once again, so they could be tithed and subjugated under his rule. Eventually, all of these settlements would come under his dominion. While Port Phasmatis would be freed from Via control by Necrovarus, they had simply traded one hell for another. The inhabitants soon became ghosts enslaved by him, unable to pass on to the next world. Sliske, the puppet master. Grigorovic was a fatally ill human who was desperate to escape death. In the hope of prolonging his life, he captured some Gwir elves and engaged in torturous experiments in order to discover the secret to their longevity. Failing this, he sought out the Majorat Sliske, who gave him just what he wanted, but with a slight caveat. For his longevity, Gregorovic would need to kill others, extending his life for those cut short, an ability he swore loyalty to Sliske as thanks. During this time, the demon triplets known as the Furies remained on Gielinor, tasked to hunt down all those that had broken their oaths to Zamorak, namely the Dragon Riders. Somehow, Gregorovic managed to separate the three demons and consume one of them. Her sisters, Avaris and Nimora, swore to hunt him down. Gregorovic had already been running from the Gwir clan, who had hunted him since he kidnapped and tortured Lord Gwir's son. This would prevent the Gwir from assisting in what was soon to come. The Elven Civil War.
Caskets blown from crystal sand, I pass to you my wedding band.
To the far west of Kandarin, elves under the rulership of Baxtorian found the Iriandul mountain pass abandoned and inaccessible, with no clear indication as to why.
Unmoored and adrift, queen without king, there is no hollow like an unworn ring.
Under the command of King Baxtorian, 5 scouts were sent to find out what had happened in Terranwyn, having to travel through the underground pass, which had been untouched for ages. Only one returned, Adwyr, who brought reports of the Ellsworth's rebellion. With this news, King Baxtorian ordered the elves to return to Terranwyn to retake Prifddinas. Fighting their way to the city's walls, they besieged the once mighty centre of elven civilization, with the intent of rescuing the other clan's leaders from the Ellsworth grasp. On the night the rescue was to begin, Baxtorian was informed of the collapse of his eastern kingdom, due to the Ellsworth spreading dissent and anarchy among his human subjects. Even while worried for his wife, whom he left in charge of his kingdom, he pressed forward with the rescue plan, knowing he would not have another opportunity to do so.
To and from Aranda, not a day to sojourn. There is no hollow like a silent return.
After freeing the leaders of Prifddinas, they reverted the city into a small crystal seed, containing the city and its inhabitants, frozen in time, but safe. Unable to do more for their home, the clan leaders scattered outside the reach of the Ellsworth clan, wishing to restore their home when it was safe once more. Returning east, Baxtorian found his kingdom destroyed and Glariel missing.
Silence greets me with teardrops of red. There is no hollow like a vacant bed.
While he knew that he could have stopped the human rebels and reclaimed his kingdom, he was far too obsessed with finding his love. By the time he came to his senses and realized that she was likely dead, the human kingdoms surrounding him had grown too powerful, and he could not defeat them with his vastly weakened army. His sorrow was so great at the loss of both his love and his kingdom, he had himself sealed under the falls bearing his name, with a monument to Glariel and his own burial taking place there.
Upon a torn pillow nestled in down, there is no hollow like a headless crown.
Hazeel and Khazard. After the elves left, Hazeel established a new empire, with himself at its head. He ruled the north, while his pupil Khazard ruled the south. The gnomes back underground. For reasons unknown, the gnomes returned underground 50 years prior to Baxtorian marching his forces to the west. This left the continent of Kandarin open to conquest. The Gnome-Khazard War. Hazeel had begun building a small city from which to rule, which further separated the two gnome settlements. Glofrey disguised himself and became advisor to the new ruler of the southern tree gnome village, King Balry. Under the manipulations of Glofrey, Balry would goad and provoke a fight, having been convinced that if they were not to strike first, that Khazard would become a threat to the gnomes. This would come to a head and reveal Glofrey's involvement during Balry's campaign for the crown, though his family would be put to shame for his actions even as unknowingly as they were committed. Sometime later, Balry decides that he will find Arpasandra and end Glofrey's treachery once and for all. The Order of Ascension. While some guardians of Guthix were given specific tasks, not all were. Orcelas Virius, the former pet of Zaros, was one such individual. He began an independent research project to teach mortals to not worship others. In this, he created the Order of Ascension. Orcelas gathered rune stones and tears from Juna's cave and tried to create a new race of beings. They worshipped him and Guthix, so he killed them. Juna no longer agreed with his plans and denied him access to the tears, so Orcelas had to steal them from her. 1,743 years after Guthix went to sleep, Orcelas would succeed in creating his new race of humans.
Edicts established. Guthix sites. Momentous stay, not dates from it. Now to work. Improve world in his name. Guthix taught worship to slavery. Gods abused worship. Abused worshippers. Abused world. Gods gone for now. What if they return? Focus on humans. Humans most worshipful, most in danger, most dangerous. Preach to humans. Teach them of freedom. Tried preaching to humans. Tried teaching them freedom. Most ignore. Some listen. Those who listen misunderstand. They follow me, worship me. Foolish, opposite of plan, lead me plan. Humans made wolf into dog. Wolf strong, independent. Dog loyal, dependable. Wolf eats human, dog worships human. Humans breed dogs for worship. I will be humans for independence.
Humans begin to settle. Humans were primarily nomadic through much of the Fourth Age, due to the many more powerful races marching across the world, destroying those weaker than them. By the end of the Fourth Age, human settlements had begun popping up, or already been established across Karamja, Mistalin, Asgarnia, and even in Mauritania, with few believing the vampire threat even still existed. The Fremennik, notably, established the town of Relica. However, a small group of them splintered off, wanting to continue their nomadic ways and seeing those who settled Relica as soft and hypocrites. They travelled the nearby mountains instead. Meanwhile, the Moon Clan also split off from the rest of the Fremennik, with the rest of the tribes believing that magic is a tool that should be reserved solely for the gods. The Moon Clan disagreed and established their own society. Caridia. In the desert to the south, Menethos and Sophanum continued to expand, becoming massive metropolises unaffected by the rampaging monsters of the world. During this time, the son of Pharaoh Queen Senlitan, Osmumten, was assassinated, and a new family began to rule in their place. Stored within the vaults of the ancient Zarosian fortress of Carid-Et was the Carid-Ib, a diamond, the only remaining piece of the god Tumekan, following his war with the Majorat. At some point, the fortress was infiltrated and the gem stolen. The thief later helped found the nation-state of Al-Kharid at the northern end of the desert. Sometime later, Al-Kharid became a wealthy and successful city, and through the manipulations of Amaskut, the Devourer, Menethos declared war on the city. Her ultimate goal was to reclaim the Carid-Ib for purposes unknown. Elidanes. On a world far from Gielinor, far from her home and her family, Elidinus searched for a magical artifact known as Aranya's Veil. Aranya, one of the spider-like species who lived there, had woven it to disguise her crippled features so that others of her species would breed with her. When her eggs hatched, her deceit was revealed, and her innocent children were killed in their thousands to destroy any trace of her genes. Elidinus, sorely missing her own children, could not abide by this. She took it upon herself to serve justice by wiping out the entire species. Guthix had seen Elidinus for what she was, as a goddess, and banished her because of it. But Aranya's veil could disguise the truth. Elidinus wanted to find her way home. The end of the age. The final town of the age was founded in Mistalin, the Duchy of Lumbridge, a vassal state of Varrock. Commissioned by King Claudius, the first duke was believed to be named Polonius, and ruled the lands between the River Lum and Varrock. However, greater things were brewing for human civilizations, as the discovery of rune essence would mark the beginning of human domination of the Western continent. Their capacity for performing magic with this new source of runestones far outstripped the rest of the race's latent magical ability. Discovery of rune essence. 1,952 years after Guthix entered his second sleep, human wizards discovered how to craft runes for the first time in thousands of years.
I am one of the few left alive who remember the time before we had the runes, when man fought man for food, when there were no havens from the creatures that seek to destroy us as a race. Yes, I remember still the times before men and dwarves considered each other allies, and only the bravest of heroes would venture beneath the ground, lest he fall foul to the wrath of the dwarves who had claimed that as their own. I remember my father, a smith of the highest standing, first telling me as a boy that a man from the north had made a discovery of something of great importance that required a great deal of study. Even as a boy, I had an interest in this world, and this discovery surprised me. That night, I stole away from my parents' home in Mistalin so that I might join this man in examining his findings. This man from the north had discovered magic. I was not the only one who had come to see his discovery. A group of people, perhaps 200 in number, of all ages and tribes, had heard similar rumours. I cannot describe to you the awe and wonder we all felt when first the man from the north demonstrated the power he had discovered. It was as though we had gained the power of a god. As we trained and studied, our powers grew stronger and more unbelievable. I saw men moving objects with just the power of their mind, others turning useless items into the purest gold. But these were not the greatest discovery that we made. It was discovered that we could take these powers and bind them into runestones, for each had been marked with the symbol of the magic we had bound into it. When I returned home, I showed my parents the powers I had achieved through my studies. My father almost collapsed with wonder, for it was then that he saw what I could see when I had left home, that this discovery was the future of our people on this world.
Through turmoil and bloodshed, struggle and adaptation, the Fourth Age roared to life for the mortal races of Gielinor, no longer oppressed by wars of attrition under gods who cared not for them. With long-lost races returning to the forefront and the first major kingdoms since Sentistan being established, all seemed well. However, with the discovery of rune essence, human development and dominance was about to enter a new age. No longer would it be the Age of Mortals. The Fifth Age would be known as the Age of Man.